Welcome to Queen Deluxe. Let's do some vintage sewing. This week on Queen Deluxe, I finished my 1890s corset. I started it last time. You can check out that video up here someplace. We did fitting, we did pattern making, we had it all ready to go, it's cut out. So let's get started. Just a reminder, this is the corset I'm basing my corset on. It is from Corsets, Historical Patterns and Techniques by Jill Salen. I will link it in the description box below. We start out with some flat lining and then we're going to insert the busk. The busk is the front closure bit in the front of Victorian corsets. It has a button and sort of buttonhole situation in these little metal parts. I have placed the busk on top of my center front pieces and then marked around the buttonhole section of the little metal parts that stick out so I know where they're going, and then I'm stitching in between those little sections and then it will slide into the pieces after it's sewn. Here's a close-up of those little sections that the buttonhole part goes into. All right, and then the other side just gets stitched all the way down the center front, and we will be marking where the buttons go after it's stitched and flipped and pressed. So I'm just stitching on my stitch line here all the way down. Here's those two center front pieces, flipped and pressed. I insert the busk into our little pocket and then top stitch around it. Then I have marked exactly where the little buttons go, and I will punch a hole with an awl and poke those little buttons through. This corset has a fair amount of cording that needs to be done, so I'm going to now start the cording. It is a long process. This is the hip piece. It goes between the center front and center back panels right across the hip. I am doing a small hand basting line right on my stitch line, so I know where to start my cording. It's about 1/4 inch down. You can see that second line here in the video. So I have my tiny little zipper foot here. I'm going to stitch down that 1/4 inch and then start the cording. The cording adds shaping to this corset without having to have it like fully metal boned all over it. So it makes it a lot more comfortable, and it does add a lot of detail and interest to the corset, and that's really what drew me to this specific corset to make. I thought it'd be challenging and kind of fun to do this much cording. Halfway through the cording process, I was thinking, wow, this was really a ridiculous corset to pick, but it does turn out really nice in the end, and I'm really glad that I decided to do it. So here's the process. You stick cording in between the couture layer and my fashion fabric layer, the pink, and so I have my stitch line that I did 1/4 inch down from my basting line, and now I'm shoving the cord in between the layers right up against the stitch line, and then stitching right up against the cord. And I will do that over and over and over and over and over again. Here's what the hip piece looks like after it's completely corded and stitched at the bottom. And then I do basically this same thing for each piece. Each piece is slightly different shape and it's on a different place on the body. So each piece has its own sort of map of where the cording needs to go. This is the center back panel, so there are 2 bone channels and then there will be grommets in between. I'm putting some cording right next to that boning channel to help add some support over right there. I am constantly going back and forth from the book and the little map of where they put the cording and then deciding on my body shape, what differences are and where I'm going to be putting the cord. So you'll see me referring to the book in this little section of video. Here's what the finished piece looks like with its channels and cording, underside, and all the stitches. And then I just continue on. Each piece going back and forth with the book, making sure that they are as close as I can get to the pattern and giving it as much support and shape as possible. And so I continue on for what seems like ages. Done cording, yay! So now it's time for assembly of the corset. So I lay out each of my pieces with the numbered pattern piece on top so I don't screw it up. I've made a lot of corsets in my time and the pieces are so strangely shaped, they don't look like anything. So you gotta make sure that you're really being careful about that you're getting everything in the right place. So here's number 2 and 3. I'm gonna be putting wrong sides together and sewing 3 layers together. So here I am pinning on my stitch line, starting at the top and bottom. So here I am at the bottom. I'm pinning the corners together on my stitch line, and then I will do the same up at the top and go all the way down. You can see just there that I have stay stitched the pink layer to the coutil on piece number 2, just so it won't shift around when I stitch the seam down. So I'm all pinned and ready to stitch the seam down. We're right on the line, inside and out. So here we go. We're gonna stitch following the pins all the way down the seam. After stitching that seam, I'm going to do some grading. So I'm going to cut right next to the seam allowance on my coutil only side to about a 1/4 inch, and then I will cut the next layer a little bit wider than that. I will be pressing this seam allowance to the left, and it will go under that little pink flap of fabric, and that will wrap over the top and create a casing for a bone. So here I am pinning that seam allowance down on top of my original stitch line for that on that seam, and it's going to be covering that up, and then we'll make a boning channel with that fabric. So that's what I'm doing here. You may be wondering why my seam allowances are so big. It's mostly for safety. Wasn't sure if all of the stitching that was happening with the cording and bone casings, if it would end up shrinking at all, and it didn't, so that was good. But then I had all this excess seam allowance that I had put just in for safety. I'm top stitching that down, and then I will do another row of stitching right next to it to create the channel. So we've got that channel done, and it looks great, and look at all the shape I'm already getting. It's really fabulous. So I'm going to continue in that vein, sewing 3 layers of the seam allowance together, making some more casings, just on and on until we get to the front and back sections. So I'm putting that hip section in at the bottom of the bust section. So that's what's happening here. It's pretty much the same thing that I've done before. Stitch 3 layers together, cut and grade the seam allowance, then pin and fold under the pink seam allowance and top stitch that in place. This does not create a bone channel. It just is covering up that seam allowance at that waistline. All right, so now I'm going to be doing a topically applied boning channel. It is got room for 2 1/4-inch steel bones. It's going to be going on my side panel that I had just constructed with going right here. It's going to be top stitched in place. I left room for it when I was plotting all of those things out. It's going down that section that has got the room for it, and then right across the hip line, as you will see. now it's time for the front and back applications. I have the back going on first. I thought that would be easier, and doing the busk last, since that has going to add the rigidity to it. It's going to make it more difficult to sew. So this is the same process. We're going to be putting 3 layers together, pinning on the seam allowance. Then we're going to be clipping and grading that seam, putting the pink layer over the top of it, making a bone channel, yada, yada, yada. Same, same, same. All together. Look how curvy it is. I love it. Ooh. It's without any bones in yet and no grommets yet. Pretty spectacular. I'm very happy. All right, time for bones. So I have 3 different types. I have a spiral bone, which can bend sideways and up and down, and then I have zip ties, which are a lightweight, and it replicates the whalebone, and then I have a just regular 1/4" steel bone. So I'm going to put the 1/4" steels in any of my straight sections, which is this side and right here parallel to the busk, and then because of my sway back and the back being curved, I'm going to have to put the spiral in here and in here, this one right here. And then I'm putting the zip ties and all the short guys that don't go all the way down, just for comfort. So that's the plan. So I will insert those and meet you back. We'll do binding. All right, so binding 101. Shh, I didn't catch this. Don't tell anybody. Okay. So what you do, right side to a wrong side, and I sewed at like a fat 1/16. Folded that up, pressed, and then I cut this binding on the straight with at a 1.25 inches. Now I folded that edge to the cut edge of the corset, and now I'm gonna fold that over and do some top stitching. It's gonna look like this on the other side. I'm trying this, cutting the binding on the straight. I'm not sure if I love it, but that's what I'm doing. Okay. Now I'm adding some beautiful lace to the top of the corset. My grommets marked with pins, and I have put in a little bit of pencil marking here. You can't really see it, but it's there. And then I'm gonna take my awl and start a hole. Okay, so here's my mark. I got my awl. I'm gonna go all the way through. All the way through. Okay, and then I'm gonna take my sharp scissors here and work this a little bit bigger. I have 1/4" grommets here, so my hole has to be bigger. Go to the other side. I'm gonna take itty bitty little snips on all four sort of corners here. Grommets have sticky uppy part and a washer type thing. So this sticky uppy part's gonna go down through my hole. Nope. Close one. We do want it nice and tight. We don't try to break as few threads as possible. These are kind of big. So. It's almost there. Perfect, nice and tight. Okay, then our little washer has kind of like a bumpy side and a, I don't know, like a plate, divot, divot. And then we're gonna put the bumpy side up. So it's kind of like this way. All right, and now I'm gonna take it over to my hammer and hammer that in. So I have, I got a grommet kit, so that it has a nice little ridge there. So you're gonna put the grommet set into that little ridge. Then it has a part that you stick on the top. I'm on a breadboard and on the stone hearth here. And you just whack it a couple times. And then I'm gonna try to see if I can get my fingernail underneath here. And I can't, so it's tight enough. So there's that. Thanks for sewing with me this week. I had fun. I hope you did too. Turned out so great. I'm so excited about it. I hope you liked it. If you did, go ahead and hit all the buttons and likes and share it with a friend. And we'll see you next time. Bye.